Morning everyone. So we are on to chapter 18 of the Dreamcatcher. I'm now desperately trying to get to the end of this book for you. So like I said on Friday, I'm just going to keep reading for a set length of time. So the chapter's obviously starting halfway, or I'm doing more than one chapter. So here we go. Night fell fast. The flames of the campfire flicked their sticks and the logs burned black like glowering eyes. After they'd eaten the watery gruel Brunt had thrust inside the cage, Moll and Alfie watched Skull and Godmother, armed with pistols and knives, tear from the clearing, and before long, just as Alfie had said, Skull's boys began to drink around the fire. Alfie nodded. Now's our chance. Reaching through the bars, he slotted the rabbit bone into the lock. He turned and twizzled it this way and that. Moll winced at its scratching, but Skull's boys wouldn't hear. They were drinking hard now, clattering mugs of beer together and trading dirty coins. Alfie fiddled on, twisting the bone at every angle, working the lock free. Then just like that, click. He pushed the door gently and it nudged open. Moll's heart leapt, but then she looked down. We'll never get past Brunt and the others. They'll see. What about the vapours? All of a sudden there were shouts from the fire. Moll gripped Alfie's arm in horror. I could see it again, Brunt was shouting. Over here, lads. He leapt up from the fire and ran to the far end of the clearing, calling the other boys to him. They all peered into the trees. Moll's heart hammered inside her. What are they looking for? Alfie was grinning. I don't know, but it's going to give us a clear run. Go, now. Moll twisted out of her cage, clinging to the bars, then hauling herself up onto the roof. Her pulse raced in her throat as she scampered across the dome and leapt into the tree. Alfie followed. A magpie shuffled on a branch above them, staring down with beady eyes. Moll's heart rose. Mushy had always said magpies brought good luck, and right now they needed it more than anything. More commotion at the opposite end of the clearing. Shouts, pointing, the boys edging further into the trees. Moll and Alfie were in with a fighting chance as they slipped from the tree down to the ground. Alfie bit his lip. Oh, they've moved the cobs to the other side of the camp. We're not going for Raven now, Moll whispered. We'd risk everything. We'll come back after we find the amulets. As soon as the words were out, she knew it was another promise she planned to snap. Alfie nodded. Can you run? Moll shot him a scornful look. Can I run? I was born running. Like fleeting shadows, they sped between the trees, on and on, away from the clearing towards the heath, and all around them the darkness grew as night deepened. Somewhere above the trees there might have been a moon, but the branches blocked the sky, warding off its light. Within seconds, vapours curled out of the shadows, a mist of faceless black. Moll's blood raced. Alfie gripped her hand and yanked on her. Don't let them know you're scared. The vapours swam before them, whirling round her head, moaning in her ears. Moll squeezed Alfie's hand as they swamped her face, plucking at her lips, snatching the air from her lungs. She closed her eyes and thought of Griff, Siddy, Mushy and Oak. And when she opened her eyes, the vapours had shrunk back a little. They swelled together again, drawing close, but this time Moll thought of the bone murmur, her parents, and as she and Alfie bounded over fallen logs and stumps, the vapours faded once more. It worked. Keep going, Alfie cried, letting Moll's hand go so that they could tear over the bracken and push past the low-hanging branches. Moll dug deep inside herself. Help us, wind spirits, please, help. Wind seemed to gust out of nowhere, drowning the moans of the vapours. Moll surged forward into its power, feeling her courage grow. The wind rushed round her, channeling through her hair, and one by one the vapours crumbled into trails of black thread. Moll and Alfie ran, smiles spreading over their faces, until gradually the trees finally began to thin. Alfie punched the air. We did it! Moll grinned, and then, to her surprise, she found herself wishing her parents had been there to see her escape. She ran on. What's behind Skull's mask? She panted. The question had lodged in her mind since she'd seen the witch doctor a few nights earlier. You've ever seen his face? Alfie shook his head as he tore through the thicket of bracken. I don't think anyone has. Sometimes I think there's nothing behind it, like there might have been something once, but it's rotted and died, and now only a mask is left. Moll raced on, level with Alfie. There's something strange about him, something stranger than a witch doctor with a mask and an evil chant. Like he's not quite real, like he's a ghost almost. Alfie slowed down as he clambered over a fallen log and met her eyes. You're bright. Brighter than I thought you'd be. There is something strange about Skull. He shot Moll a glance. He don't have a shadow. Moll scrunched up her nose as she stopped to catch her breath. Everyone's got a shadow. Skull hasn't. And don't ask me why. All I know is it isn't normal. It means something, only I'm not sure what. Almost without warning, they stumbled out onto the open expanse of the heath. The landscape was bleak, a barren wasteland of heather, gorse and bracken, and it stretched out to the coast like a dark blanket under the night sky. Alfie drank it in, but Moll looked horrified. She put a toe into the heather and gasped, Where have all the trees gone? I'm not running out there in the open. There aren't many trees on a heath, Alfie panted. It's heather and gorse out here. shoulders bunched up to her ears. Moll took a few steps forward. Her eyes widened. What's that great lump of water leading out to the edge of the world, like the giantest puddle I've ever seen? It's the sea? Exclaimed Alfie, looking at Moll as if she was mad. The moon peeped out from behind a cloud and turned the surface of the sea to silver. The what? She said. Alfie rolled his eyes. You know, where boats and ships sail to other countries. Moll nodded. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she'd never admit that. That's not the edge of the world either, Alfie added. I know, Moll replied. Then under her breath, that definitely absolutely is the edge of the world. She opened the roll of leather. Moonlit light shone onto it, and she read aloud. Many and many a footstep from you in a hovel among the gorse. A wild maiden lives who must eschew by marshland and heather grown coarse. Moll's body tensed, partly because she knew the maiden might be close, partly because once again the letters in front of her seemed to quiver and swell. It was just certain ones, but before Moll could work out any sort of pattern, the letters stilled and looked ordinary once more. The hovel will be further on, Alfie said. Moll nodded. Follow the path past the bog myrtle ponds. Alfie pointed to a sandy track just in front of them, which led out over the heath. Let's take this path. It'll wind up at the marsh where the bog myrtle ponds are. Where we can start looking for... Something moved through the trees behind them, something fast, something strong. Run! Alfie yanked Moll onto the path and they hurtled down it, but the footsteps bounded closer, tearing up the sandy track behind them. Together they raced on, not daring to look back, but then Moll stopped dead and turned around. What are you doing? Alfie yelled, spinning back to face her, but then he stopped running too. A wildcat was standing right in front of them. Chapter 19. He'd come for her, even though she doubted him, and he was panting hard, his fur wet with sweat. Griff, she whispered. Then he came, his greeting long and stuffed. You came for me, Moll smiled. The wildcat dipped his head, but he kept his distance. Moll looked back to the deep wood. It was you who ran around the camp to distract Brunt and the others, so we could escape, wasn't it? It was a sound Griff made when he was content, like a purr, but somehow wilder. His eyes flicked up to Alfie, then his hackles rose and he circled Moll. Griff growled, his eyes locked onto Alfie. He's all right, Moll. Griff, Moll whispered, crouching down, and then added quietly, we need him. Griff tightened his circle and hissed. Your wildcat hates me, Alfie mumbled, scuffing the track with his boot, but he kept his eyes fixed on Griff in case he pounced. Animals don't hate. Hate's what humans do. Griff just isn't trusting you yet. Alfie took a deep breath and moved a step closer. The wildcat bared his teeth and growled. Still huddled low, Moll locked eyes with Griff. Trust me, Alfie's all right. He won't charge us on his cop again. Last thing a wildcat wants to do is touch you, she said quietly to Alfie, so you don't need to worry. Griff tucked his head under Moll's arm and nuzzled into her chest. Moll reddened. Well, Griff he's different somehow. He doesn't mind touching as much as maybe some of the other ones might. Alfie looked back at the deep wood. They'll let the hounds out when they see we've gone. Darkness hid the dips and rabbit holes, puncturing the path, but they ran on despite them, Alfie keeping a safe distance ahead of Griff and Moll. The heather petered out around them until only rushes, reeds, and yellow gorse bushes lined their path. There, panted Alfie. A huddle of wild ponies was drinking from a boggy marsh set back from the path. The bog myrtle ponds, like the poem said. The ponies trotted away as Alfie, Moll, and Griff sped past. There were bogs all around the path now, black water surrounded by green bushes and rushes. Moll breathed in the herb pine smell of the bog myrtle. They were getting close. Listen, Moll gasped. A bird rattle called across the night sky, but Moll had traced the opening notes of its song, and she stopped on the track, pointing to a thicket of reeds lining a bog to the left of the track. She bent down, pulled away the reeds, and sure enough, there was a bird's nest tucked inside. Follow the path past the bog myrtle ponds where the nests of the warblers lie, she whispered excitedly. They took a few more steps. Bracken rose up between the spiky gorse bushes on either side of them. Then the path began to narrow, and the bracken rose higher still. It was Griff who started running first. They were almost there, and he could feel it. Alfie and Moll followed, their ears filled with the rolling cries of the nightjars. Alfie grinned at Moll as they ran. The path had almost disappeared, but still Griff ran on. Bracken fronds swung back into Moll's face as Alfie charged ahead of her, and gorse needles prickled at her bare feet. And though nobody mentioned it, it was darker now, much darker. Even the moon had been swallowed by the blackness. And then Griff stopped suddenly. He turned to face them, his eyes sparkling green against the night. There was a reason for the impenetrable darkness and the absence of the moon. Rearing up in front of them, its base jungled by bracken and gorse, was a hill. It was blacker than the night itself, and behind it bushes spread into trees which thickened into a small patch of woodland. To meet on a hill turned black, Moll whispered. Her heart drummed as Hard Time Bob's stories whirled inside her head. She stooped and picked up a stick lying by a gorse bush. Alfie turned to her. What's that for? Moll shrugged. This and that. He grinned. It's for the maiden, isn't it? Moll scowled, and they took a few steps close to the hill. It's covered in black flowers, Alfie murmured. Moll gripped her stick more tightly. She knew what black flowers meant. Alfie glanced at her. What is it? Moll shifted her weight from one foot to the other. There aren't any black flowers in the ancient wood, but Mushy told me about them. Black flowers mean trickery. Her legs felt suddenly numb beneath her. Alfie glanced at the forest, then back again at the hill. I'm not going in there if that's a trick. But Griff had already set off. Alfie stared at him. What's he doing? Moll was silent for a few seconds. Trampling all over the trickery, I suppose. Alfie fiddled with his feather earring. And we're meant to follow? Moll summoned up a pretence of bravery. I don't like the sound of tricks out here on the heath, but my bar's bone reading matches the poem, and Griff's never wrong. And with that, Moll turned to follow the wildcat. She gulped, and then gave the darkness a crazed look of terror. It was all very well pretending to be brave, but her legs were shaking and her heart was thudding inside her frock. She made a few more demented grimaces into the darkness, then hurried on after the wildcat. Black flowers covered the whole hill, crawling over it like a giant net spun from the night itself. And the closer they got to the summit, the more the flowers changed. They seemed to be getting bigger, taller, thicker, and they twisted into the night around them like crooked walking sticks. The flowers were taller than Moll now, with stems coated in fur. Pushing them aside, the three of them forced their way on. Gorse bushes unravelled in front of them, and together with the flowers they almost completely obscured the run-down building that they were hiding. But Moll, Alfie, and Griff could see, huddled in darkness on the highest point of the heath, a small wooden hut, a maiden's hovel. Its slats had been arranged any old how, and the whole thing appeared to lean ever so slightly to the left. Black flowers and giant weeds crawled up its sides and across the windows like dead hair, barring the inside from view. The only sign that hinted of anything living inside the hovel was the light that crept out from beneath the door. Alfie glanced down at the leather in Moll's hand, the words now visible in the gloomy light. His eyes widened, and he clutched Moll's wrist. The letters, some of them looked different. Moll looked down, and then her face drained of colour. Certain letters were quivering in the leather again, bolder, even darker than the rest. Only this time Moll could make out the words they spelled. Certain letters were quivering in the leather again, bolder, even darker than the rest. Only this time Moll could make out the words they spelled so clearly. Moll gasped. Witch doctor, that's who this maiden is. But her heart pounded faster. Why would my pa's clue lead us straight into the hands of a witch doctor? Griff's ears swiveled towards the hovel. Moll could taste her fear. Perhaps the witch doctor would have a spinning head with rolling eyes, or a rolling head with spinning eyes. Oh, she brandished her stick in front of her. Griff was prowling towards the door now. He turned to them and grunted. Alfie looked at Moll. What's he saying? She thought of the camp, all safe in the clearing, of Mushy cuddling her close. He says there are no such things as the amulets. There isn't anything in the hovel, and we should head back to the ancient wood this minute. Griff stalked towards Moll, his head held high, and then he nipped her on the hand. Moll winced. Alfie looked at Griff. He says we've got to go in, right? Moll rubbed her hands. Perhaps. You feared? He asked. She beat back the image of the witch doctor, who now had 2 bulging heads and 8 eyes on the ends of the rods. Nah. You? Nah. But Moll's breaths were shaking and Alfie's eyes were wide. Griff was prowling by the back door again, but Alfie hung back with Moll. He could send him in to meet the witch doctor first. They might get along all right. Griff turned to Alfie, then he twitched his whiskers, his eyes narrow slits. He's glaring at me, Alfie stammered. He looks cross. Moll shook her head. He isn't cross. He's wild, and wild things don't look cheery the whole time, especially not when they're about to go breaking into a witch doctor's hovel. You think there's really a witch doctor in there? Alfie whispered. Looks more like an old sheep hut than a den of dark magic. Summoning all of her courage, her stick held high, Moll took a step up to the door. It was slightly ajar, like a mouth beginning to draw air, and there was absolute silence, save for the plop of a toad slipping into a bog somewhere below them. Palms sweating, Moll placed her hand on the door and pushed it open. She wasn't expecting much, a few rusted pots, perhaps a weather-beaten table, but what met her eyes was altogether different. The hovel was bigger than she had expected, and it was filled with a clutter of seemingly abandoned objects, a broken chair, dusty boxes, long-forgotten rags. But among the chaos there was an eerie sense of order, carefully arranged onto scooped-out pieces of bark that were lined the collapsing shelves to the sides of the hovel were tiny animal bones, shimmering feathers, adder skins, owl pellets, spotted eggshells, unusual ferns and sharpened stones. It was as if the most intimate belongings of the heath and the forest had been stolen away and hidden inside the hovel. On a rickety table beneath the window was a patch of reddish animal fur, a fox perhaps, and on it lay a rattle carved from a walnut. Moll shivered. It had only been decorated with black swirls of paint, and the handle was tipped with bone. Only then did Moll and Alfie pick up on Griff's movements. His tail was flat to the ground, his ears cocked, and his eyes fixed ahead. Alfie seized Moll by the arm, and the hairs on her body froze, hunched in the rocking chair in the far corner of the hut. Almost completely obscured by rags was a very old woman. Her skin was grey and crumpled, and in many ways she looked just like another forgotten object in the hovel, but her eyes were open and shining blackly. And that's where I'm going to leave it. We'll start again tomorrow. See you later. Bye.